It's ad break time. I am proud to announce that the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. On October 1st, they will be launching a new series called Art and System, which will be headed up by Tim Hutchings. The goal of the series is to showcase indie games and to push the boundaries of gaming. The first games to go to crowdfunding will be a revised edition of Liam Burke's Dog Eat Dog, Anna Anthropy's Princess with a Cursed Sword, and Timothy Kleinert's The Mountain Witch. This is a fantastic initiative that I am personally excited to support. Also, if you want to help me keep the lights on over here on the podcast, you can support me at patreon.com/BeyondSolitaire. For now, though, let's get on with the show. Hey, gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week on the pod, I have a very special guest. This is Emma Friedman. She is Associate Professor of English at Auburn University and a game expert. How you doing, Em?
Oh gosh, some of that is true. Game expert? Who can say? What an interesting question that I'm confronting these days. Who gets to be an expert in this space?
You game, you're an expert at some kind of gaming, right? I mean,
I'm an expert at my gaming, that's for sure.
Perfect. All right. So you're a professor of English, and actually a lot of your work is about Jane Austen, which I might ask you about later. But how does one go from 18th century fan fiction or talking about Jane Austen, which are all like just fantastic topics, to talking about games?
Yeah, my first book, which is behind me, is literally reading smell. So yeah, it's been a long journey. And of course, the wonderful thing about being an academic is that you are constantly being graded and assessed, which means you're constantly telling the story of, wait, how did you get here? And the short answer that is, well, have a global pandemic, close all of the special collections and libraries and archives that you use to study what I was studying just before 2020, which was never published fiction written by hand, that never entered print, but was circulated in other kinds of ways. In other words, art outside of mass commercial logics.
Ooh.
Yeah. So natural segue into TTRPGs and actual play, because those are also spaces that, while there are definitely elements that are tied to kind of mass media or kind of big commercial outfits, most everybody's pretty freaking small. And I started the work kind of with a one-off experiment in about 2018. There was a call for papers for a book on tabletop role playing in the digital age. And I was like, oh, I've been watching this show. Well, actually, lots of actual plays, but especially Critical Role, which is massive even in 2018. I'm like, oh, I wonder how people are dealing with the fact that this is a massive narrative. And I'm a narratologist by training. I study the structure of stories. I'm fascinated by audiences in all kinds of ways. And at the time, I was looking for strategies of compression and didn't find them. We have them now, many years later. Critical Role is doing its own abridgments and animated adaptations and textual recaps and all kinds of things. But at the time, there weren't those things. No recap, no text recap ever lasted longer than a few episodes. There's clipping culture and GIF making culture, but there's a desire for what Critical Role is going to call everything is content when they go independent in 2019. It's a desire for expansion. And I thought that was just a kind of thing I could do for a month because it was fun. Academics do that sometimes. But when it came out in 2021, it was quickly adopted in classrooms. I started getting a lot of email about it. It became heavily cited. And that, combined with this kind of turning point in my career, meant that it made sense for me to start to look into actual play. I say I'm not the first actual play scholar. There's folks like Alex Chalk and folks like that who are publishing before me. But I am the person with tenure at a research university with a low teaching load where I can kind of spend about half of my teaching life and all of my research time intersecting with the world of analog games.
Ooh, that's super interesting. So before we move fully into games, I just want to know what attracted you to, I guess, art outside of the canon and maybe even outside of publication. I feel like when you go into an English program, everybody thinks, oh, the Shakespeare, oh, the classics, ooh, Jane Austen. So how did you get attracted to work that wasn't necessarily going to make it in the traditional sense? And then how do you figure out what to read from what's
Yeah.
left of that?
Well, I am in everything I do. I'm pioneering a particular like weird pathway, but I'm absolutely building on the scholarship of, in the case of women writers of the 18th century, recovering of what my academic absentee grandfather Cliff Siskin calls the great forgetting. So, as far as we know, our best estimate is that 75% of the early novel, the novel in the 18th century before Jane Austen, was written by women. And Jane Austen, in fact, cites a whole bunch of them in Northanger Abbey and gives us the list. This is how Rebecca Romney's new book, Jane Austen's Bookshelf, gets written: is here's the list of the things that we know Austen read because she cites them and she's inspired by them. Pride and Prejudice's title comes from a Frances Burney novel. All these sorts of things. And it's half a century of scholarship before me doing the work of recovery. So, luckily, physical books do tend to stick around, at least in a couple of copies. And so it was a question of recovering them, reading them, paying attention to them, finding which ones really capture our imagination, and realizing that there's all of this really interesting across the political spectrum, both conservative and progressive, as we might know them today, experimental in all kinds of trippy dippy ways, work that women are making. And so I just got to come in and like when all of those scholarly editions were actively, available to people like me, I didn't have to do as much of the curation. So much of it had been done by the generations of scholars who I'm lucky to still be in community with. We are recording this right after I've returned from the UK from Jane Austen's 250th birthday conference celebration at the University of Southampton. And one of the cool things, and one of the things that I think a lot about, is the fact that in Austen's scholarship, at least at the moment, I got to grow up in the field, and I get to see people grow old in the field, and still be productive and generous and wonderful, um, in ways that when I'm in game studies, women don't tend to last very long, and nobody gets to have the kind of institutional memory that we really want a thriving intellectual community, be it in academia or out. And Austen Studies is a really good example of a space that's both and, right? Like it's not just academics that were at that conference, it's book collectors, it's folks who are just enthusiasts and excited. Jane Austen Studies flourishes not just because of academics, but because of a huge community of readers and folks who are dedicated uh, to preserving her legacy. And luckily, we've been able to recruit that team over to authors like Charlotte Lennox and Frances Burney and a whole lot more.
All right, this is honestly so cool. We could probably do a whole separate interview about it, but we won't. We won't. So the other thing that's like really fascinating to me about this particular transition is just thinking about the kinds of material you'd be working with. So there's a limited amount of material when you're studying anything that's historical because only so many things are preserved. You are now working in the middle of an explosion. Like you mentioned, everything is content, and like a little bit earlier, everything is content. There are hours and hours and hours and hours of let's plays that actual plays that are big, actual plays that are small, podcasts, YouTube, anything. So Critical Role is a big deal, kind of a big deal. So I can see right why you would study that. But beyond them, like when you're looking for comparison, when you are kind of looking at the movement as a whole, how do you decide what to look at and what to take seriously?
No, I think that's a really good question. Well, first I'll say it's still a pain in the ass in the 18th century. So we just finally, I had nothing to do with this. My colleagues just finished a project that's almost as long as my career of basically everybody parceled out every surviving 18th century novel and at least one person read it and wrote a recap so that the rest of us didn't have to or
That's
don't have
awesome.
to unless it's like something that's super relevant.
Right.
But you're right. Like if we look at actual play, we can't do that. We can't do that now. In 2023, at the height of actual play's existence on Twitch, using the D&D tag alone and not counting any other TTRPG labels and only in English, it's north of 20,000 or more channels that are kind of playing some amount of D&D. And there's thousands more on top of that once you're talking about multiple languages, other language traditions, and other games. And that's not counting things that are only born audio podcasts, which are almost impossible to count. And it's massive. You're right. This is a problem. And that's the stuff that survives, right? So what I've spent the last little while doing is writing the history of the earliest of actual play, which we're talking the mid to late 2000s. The earliest examples are from about 2003, 2004. And there aren't that many that we can find and listen to or look at because you're talking about, in terms of audio podcasts, you're talking about that before podcasts are even included in iTunes. Right. You're talking about things that are before hosting sites like Anchor. You're talking about, you really hope, and this is true of maybe a handful of shows that are still in existence and still have their websites publicly archiving and making available their work. And a couple of DVD ROMs, one of which just arrived in my mailbox. But yeah, but kind of even tracing the kind of legacy is very challenging. What's helpful for the kind of boom post 2020, and there are prior booms, but nothing like the kind of COVID fueled increase in both audiences and participants that comes in 2020, 2021, 2022. This is also the rise of what I have termed the ambitious middle, which is an umbrella term designed very intentionally to counter the story that I was often told by actual play creators in the 2010s, which is that there was a division between professional and amateur. And that is kind of bullshit. There are plenty of undersung actual plays that are done by people with a hell of a lot of training and experience and craft. And there's a fair amount of high budget stuff that leans really heavily on, hey, we've never done this before. We're entertaining. You can watch us be chucklefucks, right? So those kinds of boundaries are not helpful. Budget is also not useful because nobody's going to tell you how much they spent, and few folks will tell you how much they made. So if we're trying to think beyond just brute economics, then we want to talk about how people are talking about and participating in what like Pierre Bourdieu calls like a field of cultural production. Yeah, we're getting real nerdy here, folks.
Let's go.
So one of the things, and this is me shamelessly ventriloquizing Brenton Keogh's use of Bourdieu in his beautiful book, The Video Game Industry Does Not Exist, which you can read for free on MIT's website. And basically, the idea is a mature field of cultural production is doing things like reviewing, figuring out forms of aesthetic merit, thinking about awards, building those kinds of cultures of establishing value that has nothing to do with either popular votes or connections to the state and capital, right? In other words, how much money did you make or that kind of thing. So one of the ways that I've kind of kept a sense of what is worth looking at is what are people putting up for consideration in different kinds of awards? And definitely different awards have different kinds of value, in terms of like what does an award even mean. A popularity contest is different from a juried award. A juried award is only as strong as the jury that selects it, all these kinds of things. But the act of submitting is an articulation of the creator's desire to make something worth kind of recognizing. So I've been a judge for the New Jersey Web Fest for the last several years. In fact, today, as of the time of this recording, Ned Donovan of New Jersey has just put a piece up on Medium explaining the latest version of how the judging forms uh, for the judges' consideration of different submissions has changed, and is it continuously evolving as the form evolves and as we try to figure out better ways to talk about this art form. Um, but those tend to be good places to dip in. And I'm lucky enough that because I've been paying attention to this form for so long, I actually literally cannot tell you when I started watching and listening to actual play. It's just that long ago. It's before fifth edition. It means that when I'm encountering a new actual play in these kinds of spaces of submission, I can get a sense with some, swiftness if this is part of a particular tradition of actual play that already exists, um, or if it's doing something new and I want to pay attention to it in more detail, if it's compelling in some particular kind of way. The challenge is that there needs to be a lot more folks who have that kind of base, and it's really hard in a form that kind of tends to veer very long, and most participants in the field don't consume very much of it, and once they start producing more and more, the less and less they're actively able to consume. There's just not hours in the day, and so it's a really tricky moment for actual play, that where people really want to figure out what makes something good, um, and compelling, but also we haven't been able to have the kinds of rigorous debates that, say, TTRPGs have had about different kinds of pleasure, different reasons why people might come to something.
There's so much to pick at here, but I'm gonna start somewhere really simple, which is you mentioned that you started watching Let's Plays like before you can even remember, which is well before you would have actually started to work on them. So I take it you've always like been interested in games and gaming, like as a pastime.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a gaming household in different kinds of ways. My first encounters with Let's Plays are being a kid watching my brother, who's 7 years older than I am, take the controls for King's Quest or Monkey Island, and me wanting to dial up on CompuServe. I am so dating how old I am, to look up the walkthroughs, right? Like that's my first experience of Let's Plays. And then with with tabletop role playing games, I come to them in high school, as many people of my generation did. It's the nadir of D&D's importance in the hobby. So I'm very much a product of White Wolf and Steve Jackson games. I have my copies of Changeling the Dreaming and In Nomine, and all the books of Tune on my shelves behind me. Um, and and then I kind of take a hiatus in college and in graduate school, and return, and basically actual play is my kind of connection back into the hobby. Um, but in the kind of developmental moment, as you know, Acquisitions Incorporated is basically a playtesting ground, right? For what's ultimately going to become, both fourth and fifth edition are part of Ac Inc.'s early history. And it isn't until the dawn of 5th edition. And in fact, my first home game here in Auburn began the same week as Critical Role started airing. I didn't get on the Critical Role bandwagon until much later. But I was talking to Matt at the 10th anniversary, and I was like, I just realized, because I sat down with my home table and realized it's our 10th anniversary too, which was a really lovely thing.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Also, you said something that is kind of blowing my mind right now. So you mentioned like looking up like walkthroughs as a Let's Play, and I had never thought to connect those two things.
I mean, the textual origins of both Let's Plays and actual plays, and I will just say, like, I use those as distinct terms, as many
Yes.
folks do, right? To indicate, like, are we watching a board game or video game be played as in a Let's Play? Are we watching a role-playing game as in an actual play? And then live play, people are starting to use live play again. And as long as they're using that for whatever's happening at Gen Con, God bless. Let's just not apply it to Critical Role most of the time. But so actual play, as Evan Torner and William White have told us, is a term that really kind of starts to proliferate with the Forge, with the kind of critical internet forum that is, the cradle of so much of a particular strain of modern tabletop role-playing game design. An actual play there was, I am actually going to tell you about my game so that I am not talking about a hypothetical example of how you would play my role-playing game. I am telling you what happened at my table last week.
Yeah.
And it's, but at the same time, many of my research subjects, and I have to cite Matt Mercer on this because he's the one who made me realize this connection. An enormous number of actual play performers come into the hobby, or a big part of their diet for some part of their growing up is internet forum role playing, right? Is like, some of us were born on the mean streets of LiveJournal, or other forums that will pass without naming. And in fact, I think there's only one of my research subjects who did not cite forum role playing as a formative part of their experience, if they're of a particular age. So like that kind of text to video, right? As has gone the internet, so has gone kind of how we how we share the hobby.
This is framing aspects of my childhood in a whole new light.
Hey.
Okay, so you've mentioned a couple times research subjects. In the pre-chat for this, we were talking about case studies. Mm-hmm. So when you are studying this as an academic subject, as opposed, to personally enjoying it, how do you choose your case studies, and then how do you interact with them if it's something where you're actually interacting with people or observing them live, as opposed to just like looking at the record on the internet and interpreting it?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. I was making a list of my old interviews, because I've kind of been interviewed throughout the process of being a public scholar from the early 2020s on, which is wild because I live in Auburn, Alabama, right? I live very far. I mean, nowadays I'm not super far from the folks who are making actual play in Atlanta, but definitely not an epicenter that you would associate with actual play, right? There's a fair amount that happens in New York. There's some happening in Canada. There's a ton happening in LA. There's a rising amount in the UK. So I was an observer, right? I was a distant observer. I was, during the last days of Twitter, I was keeping awake while doing basically close reading of actual play by live tweeting my observations, which is how I built an initial audience, to my surprise. And so when we come back from remote teaching, I start kind of talking. I bring TTRPGs into the classroom thanks to my colleague, Dr. Craig Bertolet, who suggested I teach a class on the subject. It filled in an hour. And because I didn't want students in an active learning classroom to like come in sick, but I wanted them to keep up, I recorded little recaps on YouTube on our Critical Prof channel. My students never watched them, but other teachers did. And so did members of the TTRPG community. And that's still my kind of little small audience there, which I appreciate. And so people started inviting themselves to class virtually through the magic of Zoom. And luckily, I was able to teach in classrooms that were wired for that kind of interaction. So Abria Iyengar is a longtime friend and was one of the very first people to come to that class. But Tim Hutchings, the designer of Thousand Year Old Vampire, Evan Torner, the beautiful, my dear, dear, dear friend and home game, like board game brunch player, mixed Tiffany Lee, who reviews for Goonhammer, any number of folks, and every fall has been a kind of interesting kind of now hybrid combination of people who are only able to come in virtually, as well as we're able to welcome some folks here to Alabama. This fall is going to be particularly exciting in that way, in ways that I can say at the moment, Jay Dragon of Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast and now working on Seven Part Pact is going to be here on an artist residency that was previously occupied by Shinging Core, who the art department brought in for puppetry. But I was like, wait, I have 1 zillion copies of Amending, the game my students are obsessed with. So we got to hang out and play with things. But yeah, so it starts out observationally. It quickly becomes I'm in conversation with folks, as are my undergraduate research students. And so ultimately I use my social media profile to have 2 surveys, one in 2023 and one in 2024, with thousands of respondents, which for an academic survey is bonkers. And most of those were even validated. And I'm thinking this works really well. And then last year, kind of as an experiment, I very quietly, not on social media, went and did field work in Los Angeles for a month, and talked to a bunch of folks who were out there and did site visits to drop out, to see the dome and those sorts of things, and had lots of lunches and long conversations, which were not official interviews. These were trust building exercises, knowing that I had an approved interview protocol that I was going to run with folks, and was in the middle of running with folks. And that's a much smaller subset. So my methodology is very mixed. So you've got surveys, you've got close readings of actual plays, you've got my more impressionistic understanding of actual play from things like New Jersey Web Fest. You've got formal, very structured academic interviews that very explicitly draw from as many countries as possible, as many different generations and ages and backgrounds as possible, although it's a very small comparative group compared to the interviews that I've done for Polygon, which of course are fair game. And I'm in just in a lot of informal contact with a lot of creators. And with that material, I always ask explicitly for permission to cite that directly. What I often use that for is to verify statements that folks have said, so that I have some corroboration. It's also my way of providing, what we like to say in tabletop as an alibi, right? People can tell me what they think, and this is true in my interview protocol, is every interview subject, because this is not journalistic work, this is academic work. We want to take care of our research subjects. They can say, I want you to cite this, but with my name. Or you can quote this directly, do not attribute it to me. Or I'm okay with you using this material only if multiple people say the same thing.
Okay.
So I often say, this is an exaggeration, I talk to everybody, so you can tell me what is true, what you believe is true. And often this is honestly like, obviously I want documentation for questions of fact, but a lot of what I'm doing when I'm talking to creators, especially right now, is talking about how they feel, right? Sentiment analysis about how they feel about ideas of community or industry. What are their ambitions? And people don't, people tell stories to themselves, no question. And one of the challenging things is that I realized last year is that as a person with who is now the institutional memory or part of the institutional memory, I have a certain amount of power that I didn't realize I had. I just think of myself as an English professor from living in Alabama. But it is a position in our small ecosystem of uh, of of a certain amount of power and influence, as small as I tend to rate it. We all underestimate ourselves and overestimate each other, and I think I am no different from my research subjects in that way. Everybody is looking at somebody else thinking about the power that they have versus what you have. But it's incumbent on folks who have some kind of institutional power to also remember that they have that kind of power, however small, because it's capacity to harm, and we want to mitigate that as much as possible. Um, and yeah, it's a really tricky balancing act because yeah, at this point, I am not just an observer. I am having to articulate different relationships of influence. Nobody's paying me, but or doing anything in that kind of way. But
Right.
there's definitely um I remember talking to a game journalist, colleague of mine who said, "Look, you work in this beat long enough and you're going to be friendly with people and you might even have friends. And the key of whether they're actually your friends is whether they understand that at some point you doing your job means they're going to have a bad day. And if they really care about you, they understand that that's the job." And luckily, so far, most of the time, the people who have called me friends that I am inclined to call friend have indeed understood that some days my job means their job sucks. Not very often, but uh, I remember my final piece for Polygon was a not especially glowing review of the finale of Critical Role's third campaign, and I had a text message from Matt, but who knew I was writing it, who said, "Look, I've had enough ego death on the internet. There's nothing that you can say that will hurt this relationship." And I mean, it's still, is still in the back of my head, don't get me wrong, but I I feel a commitment to saying what is true. I will be careful how I say it.
Yeah.
I think, especially now. But sometimes you just got to say, this was impacted by particular kinds of circumstances. These are choices that I think maybe would have been made differently in a different kind of circumstance, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I get it. I used to review board games before I became a game designer. So,
Oh, God bless.
oh,
Yeah, no, being a reviewer, man, I didn't sign up for this. I'm an observer, not a prescriber. And yeah,
yeah.
and
I,
that's what we need.
I used to hate it when I would negatively review something because I just will. My parents are both retired newspaper reporters,
Nice.
so I know that I have to tell the truth in print. And so my least favorite thing would be that I would post a review, it's negative, and then I get a "thank you for your thoughts" from somebody who is my friend. I know they just watched me poop on their game. Oh,
Yeah,
but
I
it
mean,
must be done.
yeah, and I think it's, as with many other things, this has been a year of a rising profile for me. And so that's definitely also it's been interesting how that has really been a kind of interesting experience of um how Tressie McMillan Cottom was saying this today on Blue Sky. Is like she was having the great sociologist and public intellectual was saying that she'd had some recent success, and what had surprised her was the reorganizing of people who were close to her. It's not like, oh, those people out there who don't see you as a person anymore, which I was kind of prepared for because I study that so much.
Yeah.
It's the kind of closer interpersonal challenges that also become part of it. And that will almost and surely inspire future research on my part. I had my colleague Erin Trammell is in charge of and is part of the triumvirate now in charge of NYU's post millennial pop series that was started by Henry Jenkins. And I remember him saying, you should write a book about celebrity. And I was like, if I do, it'll be about micro celebrity. And if I do that, it will be about how people use the word friendship,
Ooh, I
which I
love it.
am endlessly fascinated by. And my research has really cemented. Also a carryover from my 18th century scholarship, but uh, definitely even more acutely now, having observed, because the history of actual play, when you get past the success stories, is a lot of people's pain.
Yeah.
A lot of projects did not go the way that people wanted it to go, and often um, those are breakdowns of relationships that meant a lot to people, and sometimes that's causation, and the causation goes both ways.
Yeah.
So one of the tricky things about writing in a space, even when I have no personal connection beyond just listening to people's stories, is how to tell those stories with compassion, and respect for the work that was done in the time that something did exist.
Ooh. Okay, so actually on this note, this I had been thinking about this question. This makes it an even more interesting answer. How do you review or assess actual play? It's not like a game where you can assess the game on its merits. It's not like a book necessarily, although it does seem like that's changing with them, like with Critical Role starting to actually publish things. But actual play is supposed to feel, at least in my opinion, like vulnerable, real, like of the moment, even if it's curated. And so how do you assess it? And how do you decide like what criteria to apply and where to say that something's a mistake as opposed to just something that happened if it's actual?
I don't want to, but here we are. But no, I mean, I just launched a Patreon, and which I'm happy to for free. I'm a state employee in a conservative state, and so I needed a place to have a protective wall so that I could curate my audience. And I needed to do it fast, and which meant I couldn't like code my own thing, and I needed to not have it be a situation in which I could, like with Ghost and Button Down and those sorts of things, you can end up paying if your audience gets too big, and that's scary. So Patreon it is. Here we are. And it's because I wanted to do something particularly sticky and tricky, which is try out reviewing actual play, which I started to try to do, gosh, a year and a half ago now. The first and only one, which is now mirrored on my Patreon, um, was I was like, I'm going to try to review actual play this year, and I'm going to start with an actual play that is over 10 years dead. It was an experiment that Shut Up and Sit Down did in 2014, and never did anything like that again for another 4 years, when they recorded 2 video actual plays, and then they never did it again. Uh, and so it's like, no one affiliated with Shut Up and Sit Down will give a shit. Of course, they won't read it. And so I can just say, here's what's interesting about it. And criticism isn't necessarily evaluative. It's about describing what you see, right? And so it in that case, it's of Star Wars Adventures. It is very tightly edited. Um, it it has Matt Lees doing some really funny kind of you know uh acapella weird kind of musical effects. Is that what we want to call it?
That's so good.
um it's 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 a 3-player group. You can get in and out of 3 episodes very quickly. You get some sense of what the system is. The story is not deep or rich or emotional necessarily, but it doesn't need to be. It's a little amuse-bouche, right? And so there are appeals to that. There are constraints to that. What is the effect? Is it something that I'm going to go back to again and again? No, but um and as it turns out, it was published the day before Quinn's Quest was announced.
Ooh, timing.
And a few days later, one of the first readers of that piece is Quentin Smith, who says, I wasn't going to read this, but is very kind and started a conversation that includes TTRPGs and actual plays, that's kind of continued on ever since and kind of spools out as he returns to actual play, um, and thinks as a person in TTRPGs, what does it mean to participate in actual play? What is the kind of actual play I would want to make? Which has been my way into one of my case studies. So to come back to a question that you were asking earlier, right? How do I find my case studies? In terms of the things I'm able to observe, I'm shamelessly opportunistic, right? I find a window of opportunity where someone will let me kind of peek behind the curtain, whether it's the development of Play to Find Out, whether it's getting the early kind of pre-release children's adventure from Worlds Beyond Number and getting to talk to Taylor Moore constantly about his completely insane process and talking to Brennan and Abria about their roles as well as the rest of the cast in different kinds of ways, whether it's talking to other smaller creators about their work, either consulting with them or after the fact. It's I'm lucky enough that I get to sometimes see a seed about to sprout, or even just the perfect conditions for creation, and get to kind of keep a close eye. And it's not easy. It should be noted. As with any kind of work with human subjects, care has to be taken. Um, you're at like if you the closer you are to observing people's process as opposed to their product, the more vulnerable people are with you. If and So it's a trust, and it's a constantly negotiated trust, and luckily actual play lends itself to that kind of meta discourse of talking about, the relationships of power and things like that, or at least that's my deal. That's constantly something I'm doing, is drawing attention in the same way I do in the classroom, drawing attention to this is what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And, we are in a particular kind of power relationship, and how do we navigate that? And it's opposing forces, right? Like everybody's got some kind of power and some kind of vulnerability in these kinds of exchanges. So yeah, that's also a big part of it. But yeah,
So
it's also why I don't like the idea that I'm a reviewer, because I'm so embedded. So with the Patreon, what I've done is kind of taking that Shut Up and Sit Down review as kind of the inspiration, is kind of doing I need a better title than Dead AP Society or AP History, both of which are terrible. I think we're calling it Archival AP or something like that. But going to things where people have abandoned the project, they are not involved in actual play anymore, or the piece is done and dusted and finished and has had a lot of water under the bridge, so that I can take a look at the thing separate from the people, as much as is possible, in a form where it's very much parasocial, right? It's by which I mean you kind of have to like people and not want to punch them in the face to listen or watch their actual play, because you're watching them in addition to the story that they're crafting.
yes.
And there have been attempts to try to dial down the importance of liking the people on screen, but you can't get rid of it entirely.
No. Okay, so forking directions of questions. Okay, I'm gonna go back to this possibly, but so you brought it around yourself briefly. But speaking of working with human subjects and power relationships, you're also playing games with your students. So how do you choose what to play with them? How do you, I guess, handle that in an academic context, because grades are part of it? So how do you have fun and grade?
Okay,
And
so
how do you
yeah,
keep them
no.
safe?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I got into a fight with, Tim Kask, at a symposium Evan Torner just organized a few months ago, where I was like, "Hey, we don't talk enough about safety tools in classrooms." Um, and the fact that when we ask students to do a thing in a classroom, it is a coercive act. Um, and so I'll say I don't often play with my students. I facilitate their ability to play with each other. So I emphasize GM-less games in my classes. Outside of class, students adopt a game, and that can be a series of solo journaling games, or it can be taking on a miniature campaign of a GM'd game. Good Society is almost always adopted by my students. I own Fabula Ultima because a student asked for it, that kind of thing. But within the space of my classroom, one of the things I try to do is beyond the first couple of games, which are things like For the Queen and The Quiet Year, um, I try to have a certain amount of dialogue with students about, and we have a safety, I use safety tools before the classes even started. My fall students have already filled out a survey that basically engages with lines and veils, and stars and wishes and things like that. Um, Lines and veils work differently in a classroom than they would, and I love Jade Dragon's emerging palette that she's using for Seven Part Pact, where it's not about eliminating something from discussion, but saying what is interesting versus what is boring, what is challenging versus what is easy. So you want to avoid things that are easy and boring. You want to take care with things that are challenging, but interesting, right? In these kinds of ways. And that's part of how I frame it with my students. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to have an open door policy, but I do have one. Especially for games like we play Alice is Missing on a fairly regular basis across about uh 2 weeks or a week and a half of class, just to make sure we've really adequately set up kind of prep and debrief time for everybody's emotional health. Um, but it's also a class that's labor based in many ways, which is an ungrading practice that emphasizes you're doing the tasks. So, all of my students in the classes that focus extensively on games are devising labor contracts in consultation with me that are a commitment to, if they do the work and they do the work to a satisfactory level that shows understanding, they will receive the credit, right,
Yeah.
in those kinds of ways. So yeah, so those it's part of a kind of multi-pronged approach, when I'm focusing exclusively on games, in these kinds of ways, or even majority. So my fall classes, one of them is a class that is on game writing, which is both writing about games and writing games, and it's moving back and forth between those. One of our central texts is Kieran Gillen's Die, the graphic novel and the role playing game, as well as all of the literary texts that inform Kieran's research into the game, into both the game and the graphic novel, as well as a bunch of stuff from the new games journalism, the new games journalism, the new tabletop journalism. Deeply indebted to Kieran and to Gita Jackson, as well as to the folks at Rascal and beyond. All of and having and some of whom will be coming to Auburn to talk to my students, which is like the greatest gift ever. But yeah, so that class will be labor based. It will be a writing intensive class, but that writing, those genres will be, um, particular kinds of genres that apply in different kinds of ways. And then I'm teaching an 18th century novel class that is pairing 18th century novels with games, kind of as adaptation. When I was in school, the hotness was television and film adaptations of something like Jane Austen. But as my collaborator Emily Kugler and I have published pretty extensively, both for the public as well as academically, the most interesting adaptations that we've found are 18th century, are games set in the 18th century, either dealing with Austin or dealing with the 18th century more generally. And that was what we were doing last week in Southampton, was hurling a bunch of those games at our colleagues' heads and saying, just teach one, just teach one, which is shamelessly stealing a phrase from the American Antiquarian Society's Just Teach One program, which is like, here's ways of diversifying or enriching your syllabi by just adding one short thing. Here's all the teaching apparatus that you need.
Ooh. Okay, I want to go back to parasociality for just a moment. Okay, so one thing that strikes me as difficult when you talk about trying to separate the person from the story in this particular case is that I feel like even beyond something where, you can have an actor in a movie, but they're supposed to disappear fully into a character, right? Or a book, you can say, well, what the author is saying, or like the things that people are doing in this book isn't necessarily who the author is, or like what they are like outside of this piece of writing. But I feel like when you're watching actual play, you're watching two stories. One is a developing friendship between the people who are playing the game, and then the other is the actual story of the game. And so you are supposed to feel like you're part of that circle of friendship and that bond in order to fully like attach to the entertainment that's being presented. At least that's how I understand it. So is that an accurate understanding? And if that's true, then how do you treat it academically? Because it's not art and artist, it's their one thing. And you are actually being presented with that.
Yeah, any actual play performer player is both the author and the actor, right? And yeah, Lee Alexander has talked about this, and the gamification and the game that is reality television.
Yeah.
And of course, a recent Dimension 20 season really leaned into this, right? Because the WWE has long connections to actual play because it's kayfabe. It's, what pro wrestlers do, and to a certain extent what actual play does. It rhymes in interesting kinds of ways. So you're right that there are multiple narrative levels, and the things that we're perceiving are the making of, the behind the scenes is the scenes, as well as the story that is emerging, and that we get. And what's interesting, right, is how many actual plays, I'm thinking of Dark Dice here, try to dial down the elements of gameplay in favor of the final story. And I think there's an interesting debate there about, there's a great early essay, whose title ends with "or just bad TV," right? And I think about it as the kind of uncanny valley effect in actual play is the more you remove those elements of chance, those elements of gameplay, the more you polish it, the more you're transitioning from the set of expectations that come with actual play into the expectations of traditional television or audio drama or just narrative expectations. Because what the dice get you, the cards, the element of chance gets you the alibi to tell a story that an audience might not buy if they think you're just, doing make-em-ups. And that's the interesting moment we're at with actual play is, you've got a lot of folks who are starting to design games for use in actual play. And those games are designed for very specific kinds of genre effects or things along those lines. And that's an increased level of control. And I think it's an interesting question about when is it effective, when is it not. I remember the first time I screened actual play for an audience not already familiar with it and not familiar with the players. And it was one of those moments when I realized that if you don't have levity, if you don't have a place where laughter happens, the audience will often insert that laughter for you. in a place of friction, right? There's incredibly beautiful and lovely and award-winning actual play that at one point roll 20 pops up, right? And it's beautifully and artfully included, but it was so jarring to this audience not familiar with actual play that I heard the laughter. And that's hard, right? That's a tricky balance. But yeah, I think that no one I have talked to in what, over half a decade has ever suggested you can totally get rid of the parasocial in actual play, which is to say just the awareness that people are human. There are people like Ned Donovan, the producer of Encounter Party, who've argued that you can dial it down enough so that what people are really there for is the story and not the people at the table. Um, and I think that's really interesting. Um, I I think he wanted to succeed more than I think it ultimately did. The fact that if I find someone at that table irritating, then I'm just gonna find that person. That's still gonna get in the way to an extent, but probably less so. Um, but also that's a show that rides closer to the knife edge of this feels very determined, and so I how far am I willing to go with you is of course a question. Um, but yeah, and I think that it's interesting, right? Like how do we talk about Riz? I don't know. I
It's a good
truly
question because some
don't.
people just have it, and I don't know how to explain it. They just do. That's why Brennan Lee
Right.
Mulligan is constantly having huge clips
No.
on social media.
No, that man was also, I mean, I will say, I Brennan is a dear friend, and one of my favorite people to talk about this with. But and the joke, of course, is that he was made in a factory for this. But to be fair, he has honed himself across a lifetime, right? And I think that is the other interesting conflation is often
Right.
people will attribute to charisma, which is absolutely a factor that I don't want to discount,
Right.
with the ease and facility that comes from, like, there's a reason why Brennan won't play anything else other than Dungeons and Dragons
Mhm.
90% of the time. It's because it's either the D&D he's been playing since he was a child, or it's something LARP adjacent like the Wayfinder experience has honed in him. He is
Yeah.
such an interesting combination of the two. Um, and so we don't talk enough, and we haven't figured out a way to talk about it in a productive way.
Yeah.
The idea of skill. And the idea, I mean, and this is a larger problem in TTRPGs, right? Like, we don't talk about the idea that playing tabletop role playing games is a skill that you can joyfully get better at.
Yeah.
And when we do have that conversation, it is a conversation that's almost exclusively pointed at game masters and dungeon masters, as if they need to carry the entire burden.
Right.
And
But
as
it is
someone,
also about
yeah,
players.
it is absolutely about players and also like GM'd games. Again, this is partly because of what I teach. But it's also because of the fact that I am a teacher, right? The fact that I am a tired person, with tired friends. And sometimes, I mean, and I watch my dearly beloved home game DM is has burned out on more than one occasion from the belief that we cannot shake that he is responsible for our pleasures and for all of our prep. We cannot play anything else. And so I am a human salmon. I have people in my life who I adore and respect and think the entire world of, as both in my profession and in my personal life, who believe very strongly that the GM is the locus of pleasure and labor. And I say no.
I agree.
No, that seems like a really masculine power trip to be on, quite honestly. It's a really strange kind of taking on of care work
Yeah.
as a kind of which, and I find myself thinking about it as a very oddly gendered thing. And I don't entirely have my head entirely around it. It may just happen to be that that it's something that I'm encountering primarily with the men in my life. Um, and that may be unusual to me. So more study is needed. Um, but it's one of the reasons why I am really interested in GM less and GM full games. Games where we distribute that kind of labor. And I can hear Brennan in my head saying, right, like if you invite me to your dinner party and then you say that I have to bring a dish or I have to help cook, then I feel like the social contract has been broken. To which I say, buddy, potlucks, they exist.
They do.
They're really great, right?
Also, like if you want a long running campaign of a role playing game, the GM has to be enjoying it too, and that means that you have to carry some weight.
The GM is a player. Well, and also, I mean, I think that I do not believe that actual play is the cause of any modern gaming challenges.
No.
Actual play often reflects the challenges that we all face. But one of the things that actual play does often disproportionately emphasize is the role of the game master because, and this isn't just like big budget actual play, this is all actual play. You have to have somebody who's making the decisions, who's kind of the showrunner.
Yes.
And so it lends itself to having a game master who is also doing that kind of labor. And thus, while there are plenty of actual plays that focus on games that are GM-less or GM full, the vast, vast majority are going to have a GM or a DM, even if they're not playing D&D. And that we have, but that again, I think that's mirroring a larger reality, even though it is also a response to the current structures of how actual play gets made.
So I'm gonna ask you one more serious question before I ask you a couple softies, just because we're running out of time. But okay, so I'm not a huge actual play watcher, but if I were to start watching them, and like obviously you can just watch things for fun and entertainment. I'm not saying you can't, but this is a podcast about being extra. So what are some things that I could watch or pay attention to that would enrich my experience of watching that actual play and make me more alert to what's happening as I do?
Sure. So first, I'll say you don't have to watch actual play. Most people are listening to it even when it is born video. We know actual play is second screen content, and by and large, it is designed for that purpose. Um, so I would say that it's really a question. I mean, it's funny. I was literally revising my how to read an actual play section today in the book. And so there's lots of things that you can attend to. In a multi-camera, everybody's on screen all the time kind of structure of the Critical Role variety. That's one of the appeals is literally like you can watch a scene and see different reactions, right? Like one of my first pieces for Polygon was asking a bunch of people like what makes for a good actual player, and it's the first audience, right? That some of the most engaging and exciting things, either in audio or video, is when you get that human response of the player who's watching or attending to a particular exchange, not the center of the exchange. I live for Abria Iyengar's reactions in any medium. It's why it may not be why we're friends, but it certainly doesn't hurt that she is such a good mirror for what's happening when you're watching something that she's participating in. And so, and I think one of the things that I find really interesting when I'm watching actual play in those kinds of ways is, uh, you know, who's got the ball, who's got the agency, um, is there a visual language? More and more actual plays are that do work in video are experimenting with different kinds of visual language. I think it's 2023's Gudia is a beautiful South Asian Bluebeard's Bride that literally has the overlay of the bride kind of coming apart and coming back together in interesting kinds of ways. You've got things like the Mage, the Ascension actual play miniseries, As Above, So Below, which is a love letter to the cradle of a lot of actual play, which is to say, it's set in Burbank and it uses Google Maps and it uses a lot of visual density to engage the audience. The quintessential example is the work of Hyper RPG, where if you want to see something visually interesting, well, go to the actual play that's created by a cinematographer and a game designer, right? People who are literally using actual play not to make money in and of itself, but as the calling card for what they can do with live production in really interesting kinds of ways. And Dimension 20 has added a whole lot of visual density into punchy seasons increasingly. But yeah, but I will say, I've just cited a bunch of really visually interesting actual plays, but really my heart is with the audio form these days. As much as I love video actual play and what it can do, um, Taylor Moore is providing a master class in editing and sound design for in Worlds Beyond Number, building off of previous work that Fortunate Horse has done with Oh These Those Stars of Space and Fun City and others. Um, that entire tradition, Brian Flaherty of Many Sided Media, which is the creator of My First Dungeon, is kind of following in that kind of artistic path, and Play to Find Out is a different variation on that. Quentin Smith is trying to, to my great delight and joy, um, do pedagogical, archaeological, actual play that shows you how the thing is learned, shows you weird ass mechanics, but has this kind of more subtle version of the more slash Flaherty style, because Flaherty is doing the editing and sound design. I'm very excited for the next season, which is not publicly known what system it is, but it is a system that is near and dear to my book historian heart. And I'm very excited to see what the fuck they did with that. I have the audio files, but I have not listened to them entirely because it's the raw, not the edited. But that's coming soon and is very exciting. And I think audio lends itself to digestibility in ways that video often sprawls, because so much of video, not all, but so much of video is live or live to tape,
Mhm.
because editing is labor. It's so labor intensive, especially on the video side. It's often prohibitive. Audio editing is slightly less labor intensive, and you're more likely to see it across the kind of budgetary span. You'll see it in things like Planet Arcana, which is co-GM'd. And Jay Stroutman, one of the GMs, is uh, when not GMing and doing TTRPG stuff, is a working touring musician, and it shows. There's some really cool stuff out there, and that's only, I mean, we could go on and on in terms of like what's interesting and happening, but I would say look to the web fests and see. Look to the Ennies. The Ennies have more in the streaming category, more submissions than ever before. Go see what the Ambitious Middle is creating. There's a world beyond Dimension 20, Critical Role, etc.
Awesome. And then, okay, so we've talked about consuming other people's play. What have you been playing recently that you enjoy?
Um, uh, Most recently, I was in a playtest for J Dragon 7 Part Pact, which is the second playtest I've been able to participate in for that game. I'm already organizing experimental when Jay is here in Auburn. We'll be running playtests of the convention length version that doesn't require that you like rent a house and book up a bunch of days and figure out how everyone's going to eat breakfast. Just 3 hours, and we're going to see how that goes. Um, So that's been the kind of thing that's like eating my brain. Um, I have been doing some demos of Austin games, obviously. I have next to me the Desperation Hack that's still in playtest. Aldsworth 1811. Jen Martin is making a Jane Austen Desperation Hack of the, and
Ooh.
I'm very, I've been thrilled about that. But yeah, and then most hilariously and probably fitting for this interview, I live posted about this on Blue Sky weekend before last, but I have a board game brunch every Saturday, and we've been doing this since the very early pandemic. So we're scattered across New York, DC, and down here in the South. And one of my dear friends who is a most of my board games are basically deaccessioned from her collection. So a deep well of knowledge. So when I tell you we all collectively found out that she had never played Catan, we were like, "Oh, we're doing this." And this is my genius friend. Like literally like categorically the smartest person,
Just
best
skipped a
game.
grade.
No, skipped
I'm
all the
kidding.
grades, and is schooling us all forever. And I was like, "This is my one chance. I'm player one. She's never played this game before. This is my one chance to win Catan, a game I hate, but you know." And of course, like she, you know, we got 2 or 3 turns in, and she's like, "Why do people like this game?" And we're like, "Sorry, don't know what to tell you." But I did win, it was very exciting. And then we all collectively agreed, "Oh, right, this is why we never play this game. Carrie will never play this game again." So, yeah, so, you know, there's also that, you know, but yeah, I've been getting ready to uh be with my niece and nephews again, and last time we were neck deep in Mouse Ritter. Although my poor niece, who is 6 and very brave, somehow Mouse Ritter, apparently the OSR is too much for her. I don't know if it's the mice or the OSR. Who can say? We're gonna find out at some point. But I've been, as I've been reorganizing my shelves, I've been talking to them about what will we play this time,
Aw.
guys? What I should do is take my big box of Daggerheart, which I unboxed for them on FaceTime, and they were very excited by the shiny tokens and the gold edged cards and all those sorts of things. But the thing is that when you fly with big boxes of games, TSA has many questions.
Yeah.
TSA has many questions about Yazebas and Slug Blaster, which they have flagged every time that they've been in my suitcase. Um, yeah, and someone told me it's not the big box, it's anything that has a deck of cards, that it's the compression of cards that's most likely to get you stopped by TSA.
That's
Um,
interesting. I would have thought it was like something a little more like weird because cards just it's how is it different from a book? I carry books through all the time.
I don't know, dude. This is just stuff tells people tell me. So I cannot say this definitively. I've not done A/B testing. I have not like you know, separated it out to see like, oh, let me travel with Slug Blaster this time and see if that's the one that's borking it or you know what. Um, I just haven't made the experiment in a while. But but yeah, it's been an interesting uh it's precisely because I've been at conventions and conferences, I haven't played as much, and so I'm getting the gang back together this weekend. Ironically, I'm really bad at playing games at conventions. I now to be fair, I'm fairly new to going to conventions because again, I returned to the hobby in the middle of a global pandemic. But I have been informed that I do PAX Unplugged wrong because I'm not good at like hopping into a game. To be fair,
You
I went
can't
to
do it
PAX
wrong if you have a
Unplugged
good time.
solo. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who was like, "You should do a panel at PAX," and I was like, "What? What? Who me? Uh, that's a thing other people do." maybe I'll be proven wrong. Who can say? But I have to finish a book before I can think about what I'm doing at PAX other than showing up and hopefully eating a cheesesteak and maybe finding some water ice out of season.
Fantastic. And then one more question. So obviously you have an online presence. How do you like to be found if people have further questions for you or want to follow your work?
Absolutely. So I own the means of production, so to speak, at ecfriedman.com. And that'll link you to lots of other things. I am also EC Friedman at Patreon, where I am, again, making everything completely and totally free just behind a little bit of a subscriber wall so that folks can see what's happening in terms of my experiments with reviewing ancient actual play, field notes from different kinds of research. If you want to hear more about playing 7-Part Pact as the only cis woman in a half woman, half cis dude, 1/3 British dude game, that is also documented there. It's a little repository. And I am the most terminally online on Blue Sky, where I am FRIEDE, and the usual stuff after that. But yeah, and I'm happy to hear from folks all over. Also, in the fall of each year, I do very janky, very dubious vlogs. They are 20-minute. Dr. Friedman is very tired after class recaps of how class went on my YouTube channel, Critical Prof, which I share with Dr. Emily Kugler. That also will have links to all of our academic talks and things like that.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for the time. I've really appreciated this conversation.
Oh, it's so much fun. And it's so much fun to mark time with these kinds of interviews. Sometimes I feel like I'm answering questions in kind of redundant ways, but what's really lovely is to watch the evolution of my own responses to questions. And this has been a rich treasure trove of new to me questions or new spins on those questions.
Good. I'll have to have you on again and ask some more.
Hey.
All right, everybody out there, please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.